So get this, a single social media post just put the entire global drug industry on high alert. The proposal is pretty wild, a 100% tariff, and it's designed to completely change where our medicines come from. So let's dive in and break down what this really means, who it's actually aimed at, and why this is, such a massive deal.
Okay, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into the details of this new tariff. Then we'll look at why a major player like India's generics industry seems to be in the clear, at least for now. From there, we'll dig into the threats that are kind of lurking under the surface, figure out who this policy is really targeting, and then we'll zoom out and connect the dots on why this whole thing matters.
All right, first things first, let's talk about the announcement itself.
So, this is where it all started, a post on Truth Social. And look, the language is super direct, no mincing words. It lays out this really dramatic new policy, a huge tariff that's explicitly designed to shake things up and change where our medicines are manufactured.
And just to be crystal clear, we're not talking about some small tax tweak here. A 100% tariff that literally doubles the cost for any company bringing these specific drugs into the country. It's a massive financial hammer, really, designed to force a big change in behavior.
But here's where it gets really interesting. There's a twist, like a built-in escape hatch to this whole thing. See, it's not just about punishment, it's also a major incentive. The deal is, if a company actually starts building a plant in the US by the deadline, they don't have to pay the tariff. So the message is pretty simple. Get those shovels in the ground right here in America.
Okay, so what does this mean for the big global players? Well, let's start with a giant in the industry, India.
Now, you'd think a pharma powerhouse like India would be right in the crosshairs, right? But the initial take is that they've mostly dodged the bullet on this one. And that kind of makes you wonder, why is that?
Well, the whole answer really boils down to this key difference between branded drugs and generic drugs. The tariff is laser-focused on the new, expensive, patented medicines. It's not aimed at the cheaper, off-patent versions that come out later.
And that right there, that's India's bread and butter. The country is basically the world's pharmacy when it comes to low-cost generics, supplying huge amounts to the US, and since what they're mostly sending over aren't those branded or patented drugs, they kind of sidestep this whole policy, for now anyway.
But, and this is a big but, don't mistake spared for now with totally in the clear. If you scratch just below the surface, you'll see there are some very real worries starting to bubble up in the Indian pharma world.
The big fear, when you talk to people in the industry, is that this is just step one. They're asking, what happens if the definition of branded suddenly gets a lot wider? If things like complex generics or biosimilars get roped into this, well then the whole game changes, and fast.
And this isn't just some abstract risk. For some of the biggest Indian companies, their exposure is pretty significant. I mean, look at Sun Pharma. About 15% of their total revenue comes from US branded sales. And Dr. Reddy's? They get nearly half their earnings from the US market. So yeah, any expansion of this tariff could be a really big deal for them.
And it's important to remember, this tariff isn't happening in a vacuum. It actually fits hand in glove with a separate US government investigation that's already happening. That probe is looking at the entire pharma supply chain from a national security angle. So when you put it all together, it really points to a bigger, more strategic shift in policy.
Okay, so if India's huge generics industry isn't the main target, then who is? Well, to figure that out, all you gotta do is follow the money.
And to really get the stakes here, you have to appreciate the scale. We're talking about over $212 billion worth of pharma imports to the US in just 2024. That is a massive pie. So the question becomes, who's getting the biggest slices?
And this is where the story gets really clear. If you look at the dollar value, Ireland, by itself, accounts for nearly a quarter of all US pharma imports. Then you add in Switzerland and Germany, and it's undeniable. European countries are the ones dominating the market for these expensive patented drugs. India, despite its huge volume of pills, is actually a distant third when you look at the total value.
So the takeaway here is pretty straightforward. Yeah, this announcement made waves everywhere, but it's really the big pharma companies in places like Dublin, Basel, and Berlin that are on the front lines. Why? Because they're the ones shipping the exact kind of high-priced, patented medicines this tariff is designed to target.
All right, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. What's the strategy here? What's the end game? I mean, why would you even roll out a policy like this to begin with?
Well, it's not just about trade numbers. This is a pretty clear three-part strategy. Step 1, use the tariff to push companies to build their factories in the US.
Step 2. Doing that reduces how much the country depends on foreign nations for essential medicines. And Step 3, that whole process, in theory, creates a lot of jobs here at home. And this whole idea fits into a much larger global trend that we're seeing everywhere, really. For decades, it was all about globalization. But now, a lot of countries are focused on what they call onshoring or friendshoring, basically bringing the production of critical stuff, whether it's microchips or medicine, back home or to allied countries. It's all about controlling your own supply chains.
So, at the end of the day, that leaves us with the billion-dollar question, doesn't it? Is this policy going to work? Will it actually bring a critical industry back home? Or is it going to backfire and kick off a big, messy global pharma trade war that messes up the supply of medicine for everyone? Honestly, we don't know the answer yet, but it's definitely something we're all going to be watching very, very closely over the next few years.